Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show today. I'm really excited you could join us. Today, we're talking about branding. We're talking about how you can accelerate your brand. And this is probably one of the most important things you really need to focus on running a business because it's your reputation. It's what kind of controls the look and feel of your business to the outside world, amongst many other things. I'm doing a pretty bad job of explaining, which is why I brought our expert on today, Andy Seth. Now, Andy's entrepreneurial journey has taken him through 4 successful 7-figure exits, and his company Flow Marketing is recognized as being in the top 10% of B Corps worldwide. Now, thriving in the face of COVID-19, Flow Marketing is on track for a 10 million run rate in 2020. That's awesome. She goes to show how successful he is in helping companies with their brand. Andy's agency is the nation's first accredited with federally registered apprenticeships. Can't say apprenticeships today.
I mean, you don't have to say the word in order to do it.
Apprenticeships. He's helped more than 1,000 low-income students go to college with scholarships as well. That's pretty cool. Andy has received numerous awards such as 40 Under 40, Top 25 Most Influential People, and Leader of the Year. He started 9 companies, 8 of which are professional services, scaled 4 into multi-million-dollar companies, and has generated millions for clients such as Microsoft and Levi Strauss. His mindfulness blog generates thousands of visitors per month, and his book is a #1 bestseller, and his album has been listened to in 36 countries. So he's a little busy, but still not too busy to come join us today. Andy, thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate you joining us.
It's my pleasure. I love hearing those intros because it feels like, yeah, I guess I have done some things. I'm just on a mission to do so much more that it feels like, yeah, that's good, but we got work to do.
So my COO and I talk about that all the time. In business, it's really hard for us to look back and like pat ourselves on the back of what we've done. We're so obsessed with where we're going that it seems like we rarely ever appreciate where we are. So I could definitely relate to what you're saying.
Yeah.
So congrats on your success, man. COVID and you're still 8 figures. That's awesome. And you're doing this in branding. And let's start at the beginning because I think it's such a cliche word, branding, and a lot of people don't really know like what branding is and how it works. So let's talk about that. Like from your perspective, an expert in the space, what is branding and what are we really talking about and how does branding really work?
I love this because actually I had 0 value for branding coming into this business. So all of the other businesses that I've built have had almost no branding associated with them from a corporate standpoint. Where I did have branding was on me. I just didn't know that it was called branding. You know, it was one of those things where I was like, well, look, I don't know how to, let's take my last company, which was a wealth management business. I don't know how to outmarket Fidelity and Schwab. They're huge companies, but I was an investment advisor and I built a company. And so I was like, what am I going to do from a marketing standpoint? What's the brand? And I was like, well, I can only name 2 famous advisors, Susie Orman and Dave Ramsey. All right, cool. Well, I'll just be more famous than them. Or sorry, more famous than anyone else that's local. Maybe not as famous as them, but that'll at least get me like on the map. So that way people will know who I am, why I'm better, why they should work with me. And at least they can feel what it's like to hang out with me. Like if we were talking face to face, they'd be able to feel what it's like but just seeing me online. Like what does that look like if it was just online, but you'd still get to know me that way? And that was where I came from. That's called personal branding, but I didn't know that. I was just like, that's the problem I needed to solve. When I came into building Flow Marketing, we actually didn't start having a branding service. We had started out as customer service outsourcing, so live chat, email, text messaging. Then we added on content marketing. And as I hired a creative director, she was like, why don't you have a branding service? And I was like, that stuff doesn't really even work. Like, what is branding? She's like, what do you mean it doesn't work? You are a brand yourself. And I was like, no, I'm just me. She's like, well, no, here. And she explained to me. And so I tell you this story because, first of all, I've been a doubter for almost my entire career as to the value of a brand. Yes, I know big company brands, but whatever. I don't have a Nike that I sell, okay? I don't sell an Apple product. Those products already have a big leg up. I sell something that's a service that a lot of people sell. So like using those parallels, we're kind of like, and like big deal. Like Google has free lunch in their and I don't have that ability. But here's what I did learn about branding which now defines our approach. I learned that when you go through a branding process, there's a lot that one can get out of it and it costs a lot of money. Typically it's like 50 to 60K. When I stripped it down to what's the actual value for me and for the clients we work with? The value was making something so tangible that it would define all the things, your mission, vision, value, it would define your voice, how you represent yourself on social media, how you represent yourself in copy, basically all these things that if you handed to somebody, a graphic designer, a web designer, a content marketer, a social media manager, anybody who's touching your brand, they would get it. And they would get it and they wouldn't waste your money trying to figure out things about you that you already know. All you're trying to do is define those things in a brand. So for me, that 50, 60 grand project turned into a $10,000 offering. I could strip away all the things that felt like a lot of fluff and just say, if you're going to spend money on marketing, you need to start with having a really solid set of brand guidelines, and you can get that done for 10 grand and you hand it to the people that are now going to do all the work, and they'll not waste your money on ad spend that doesn't work, on websites, revisions that don't work, that aren't quite what you had in mind. Like all those round and rounds that cost you money and time, you eliminate by having a great set of brand guidelines. And in order to have a brand guideline, you have to have a brand. And so that's how I define brand. It's a very long definition, but a brand is simply how you represent yourself to the world.
It makes a ton of sense. When we have brand guidelines, and like you said, it helps so much, because I think a lot of people are like, I don't even need to focus on this. But I think you hit the nail on the head that if you don't, it costs you so much time and money and time, because what happens is everything's jacked up. It's all incongruent. Your website doesn't look like your Facebook page. Your Facebook doesn't look like Twitter. Everything isn't uniform. And then what happens is you have to go back and fix it all once you eventually develop brand guidelines. Do you see that happen with a lot of companies, that they don't focus on this and they have this nightmare of going back to update everything to make sure it all fits their guidelines?
All the time. I have a law firm that just came to me. They were launching their own podcast, and they were marketing it. And so they had different kinds of marketing assets and whatnot, and trying to help them position themselves on LinkedIn and create content out of the podcast. So basically using our content service. And when I looked at it, I was like, hey, can you ask your marketing folks to update, these graphics? And here's why. The font doesn't match your font on your website. Your logo is serif here, but it's sans serif there. Your blacks on this website, these are dark grays on this image. Like, there were so many things that were incongruent. So when you flipped back and forth between this person's imagery on LinkedIn and their company's website, and this is a 10,000 plus lawyer law firm. We're not talking about some small law firm. It didn't match. Like, you couldn't even tell that it was the same law firm. And that is a complete miss. There's a massive law firm that has spent millions in creating this brand, and yet at an execution level, they weren't able to get it right on just some small pieces. So like, that happens to large companies, and the rework on that may be expensive, may not be, but imagine if you did that on a website. Imagine if you did that on print collateral. Like, yeah, that stuff starts to cost you money, and ads, right? Or even just having your logo done correctly for an event. I mean, there's so many different ways that you're marketing. I think this is important for small companies and large companies alike. One of the issues that people have is, if they're going to spend money on any kind of marketing or advertising, you want to do this work first. And it does need to constantly be updated, because your brand may evolve. If you took a look at mine, for example, I have a really interesting challenge personally. I have a company, but I also have a personal brand that's bigger than my company. So my name has been marketed way longer than my company. My company's been around 4 years. I've been around 42. And every dollar spent on me as a live human goes a lot farther than it does trying to brand my company. So we had to make those things match. If you went to my company's website, you'll see that we help companies scale their profit and purpose. And if you go to my personal brand website, you'll see that the header says profit and purpose. The core of what I'm about is profit and purpose. My business, me, etc. That's how we unify the message. But if they said two different things, it would be kind of confusing. And people would be like, so what does this guy do?
Andy, what about the difference between marketing and branding? Because I hear some people talk about this like they have to decide which one they're going to spend money and time on. I think you hear it too. Like, I'm going to put my money into marketing to get direct response, to get leads, and not put in branding. I hear that all the time. So what's the difference between branding and marketing, and why are both important? It's not like you can just choose one over the other.
Yeah, that's true. Marketing is an umbrella term. So think of it like saying, I play a sport. Cool, I do marketing. They're umbrella terms. Now the question is, what sport do you play? Well, what type of marketing do you do? And so there's many types of marketing. And let's just take any of them: social media marketing, content marketing, paid advertising. There's all kinds of marketing, advertisements, billboards, radio, podcasts, right? There's all kinds of marketing. So just like there's many types of sports, there's many forms of marketing. Marketing is just the umbrella term. Branding is one of the components that goes into having marketing campaigns. It's kind of the precursor. It's the training ground, really. So let's say you're playing a sport. Let's say we're playing soccer. You have to have the right equipment to play, right? It's maybe not a lot of equipment, but you do need some equipment to play. You need at a minimum a ball, and then you need some other things if you want to up that. A set of brand guidelines is the equipment. You know, it's what's the equipment you need in order to execute those particular marketing strategies correctly. But if you don't have that equipment, you're basically like, yeah, I'm going to go play a bunch of different sports with my hands and feet. Can you? Yeah. Are you going to be any good? Nope.
Makes perfect sense to me. What about getting target customers? Do you think that branding makes it easier to kind of go after your exact demographic? And if it does, how?
Yeah, I think a good set of brand guidelines does two things when it comes to target markets. So you have, on one hand, you have a target market, or you might have several target markets. Defining who they are, of course, is going to be important, because then you can clarify the message to them and what they care about, what problems that you're going to solve for them. But the other thing a good set of brand guidelines does is it creates a muse. And a muse is different than a target market. This is something that I picked up from my creative director, who she had come out of Lululemon. Lululemon uses this muse concept as well, and it's basically a fictional character who represents all the things that your target market aspires to. So no one human could possibly be all those things, but it's all things that your different target markets aspire to. One of the common questions we have is, yeah, but I have multiple people that I sell to. So do I. I have multiple different kinds of customer types. I have B2B and B2C, and I have this kind of industry versus this industry. I have all kinds of different target markets. But what is it that they aspire to that's in common? And there is no one thing that they aspire to. So you create this fictional character who represents the things that they all would aspire to. And why is that important? It's important because when you're creating, you need an inspirational character, hence a muse. You need an inspirational character to create for them. When you create for them, you create something that everybody else wants. So when I create something like, let's say whatever the product or service is that you sell, let's just take branding services. When I create a branding service, I'm creating a branding service that's an aspirational model for anybody, whether it's a personal brand or a corporate brand. If you're looking at your personal brand, you're hearing what I'm saying, or you've got a company and you're thinking about it from that perspective and you're hearing what I'm saying, the way I'm telling this should resonate regardless of which target market you are. You should hear this and say, this makes sense to me. Or you should hear this and say, this isn't for me, right? I'm not going to spend a lot of money on marketing. I'm just going to maybe solopreneur this or freelance, and I just basically need to collect gigs off of Upwork and Fiverr. In which case, if you're not going to have a large amount of, or any amount of marketing spend, brand guidelines might not be that important to you. Understandable. But if you do put marketing spend out, regardless if it's a personal or a corporate brand, then this should resonate with you. And that's what I mean, is creating for your muse. And that goes into the branding process in addition to having target markets well-defined.
Makes sense. You talk about brand guidelines. You've talked about it several times. What are brand guidelines? Like, what are in brand guidelines? Like, what kind of things do you address, from colors? You mentioned colors. What other kind of things are in these guidelines?
Yeah. A brand guideline is a really well-designed PDF that is of the caliber that if somebody looks at it, they will get the information, but also the look and feel for your brand. So included in that are going to be mission, vision, values. So defining what those are, what your buyers or your customer journey is. You know, what are the problems that they have internally, philosophically, externally, etc. What are the solutions you provide for those things? What are those products and services? defining those, and then mapping out what that journey is. How are you the guide to facilitate them, et cetera, et cetera. Then inside of there, there's a muse, and that muse, which I just talked about, is an entire section of it. Then there's your target personas or your target markets. Who are those people? And you might have 1, 2, 3, however many. What is the one-liner that unifies everything you do? For me, it's profit and purpose, and that's my business, that's my personal, everything. But what's the one-liner that you're about, that everyone they'll get it? Then you have everything from what your tone is, what your copywriting style is, what your social media style is, do's and don'ts around imagery, logo usage, fonts, colors, defining what those fonts and colors are, when they're appropriate to use, when they're not appropriate to use. And once you have all of that, you have a basic set of brand guidelines.
What about brand identity?
Brand identity is a component in there. What you're really talking about is, what are you trying to represent yourself as? What's the essence of your brand? And so when you look at, there's a thing you can Google called a brand pyramid, for example. What you're trying to do is boil it down to not just like what are the functions of your brand, like what do you functionally do? Like we do content marketing, or we do customer service outsourcing, we do branding, like not just the functions, not just the benefits, not just why people care, but what's the essence? What is the essence of that brand? When you think about an identity, like you have to define that, because we as people, Ty, we have the essence, whatever our essence is. But when people come around us, they kind of catch the vibe, right? They're like, oh, I like how he or she gets down. Like I feel them. Why do they feel you? Because what you're putting out resonates with them, right? But your brand has to put out something too, but it has to be constructed. It doesn't just like happen. Whereas we as humans, it just happens because we exist. A brand doesn't exist. It's fictional. Right? So you have to give it an identity. You have to give it an essence. And that essence, for me, for example, my brand essence is uplifting. That's my essence to the brand. Everything we do should lift people up. And if you start to look at the things that I do and the things that I touch, and if you listen to my intro, you'll see my whole purpose is to lift people up. It's to be uplifting. So you won't hear me diss people hard. You won't hear me talk a lot of smack about people. I will have pretty opinionated viewpoints, but like you'll hear me lift people up and encourage them rather than kind of knock people down. That's just not my style. So that's my essence, but my brand flow needs to carry that essence as well. It needs to lift people up, lift voices up, lift brands up. Like that's an essence. That's the identity.
How do you create that? I mean, how do you even begin to start to figure that out?
It's a multi-step process. And so I don't know how one would do this necessarily on their own, other than maybe reading some books on brand identity. I've got some pretty good blog articles on our website around brand identity, but I can tell you when we walk through this process, this $10,000 branding process that, like I said, is usually like a 50, 60 grand thing. It's multiple meetings, meeting with the client stakeholders, meeting with our creative director, with our COO, with our content folks, and like teasing out a lot of different questions, but then having expertise to be able to reflect some things back. One of the things that I hate about quote unquote experts is they'll basically go do whatever you say. And you kind of like, well, I could have done that on my own. My view is that if you're an expert, you need to come to the table with some ideas. You need to come to the table with some thoughts. So for us, the way people would go about this is they would say, okay, I want to do a branding process, and then go through it and help define that. When we do it for corporations, I should mention that's that 10,000 process, because because we're having to invent something that's out of nothing, right? Or they might exist already and we're refreshing it, but there's extra work that has to be done. On the personal brand side, it's actually $4 or $5 grand. And I say it just depends on a couple things, but let's just call it $4 grand, because the human exists. There's not a lot that we have to invent. What we need to do is tease it out, extract that wisdom and that knowledge from the person, and turn that into what's the identity going to look like from a brand standpoint. But you already exist, so it's actually less work, and therefore it's less money.
What do you do? Do you find that there are guidelines that kind of you guys follow, or that somebody should follow?
It's a pretty specific process. Yeah. We call it brand beat. It's just like our own name for the process that we use. But if you've read a few different books, you can kind of get a sense for it. One is Story Brand. Pretty well known in the branding world. Story brand by a guy named Donald Miller. So we follow that process, but we've added quite a bit to it. There's another book called Contagious. Contagious is how things go viral. So story brand is how you get clarity around your message, but just because you have clarity doesn't mean it's any good. So how do you get people to like care that it's good? So we add this other step, which is multiple steps, 7 steps to the process built around this methodology that's defined in this book, Contagious. And then we also have some of our own things that we've come up with based on what we've seen work. Like this Muse, for example, is in neither of those. But what we do find is that the Muse has been a really strong inspiration point for our clients. And so we've invented a couple of different pieces as well and interjected that into the process. But it's a very step-by-step process. It's just that there's a lot of questions and feedback that's given by our team in order to go through that.
Andy, what kind of things do people really need to figure out to start establishing their brand? Because when I asked you what was in like the guideline or the actual guideline, the brand guidelines, you had to have named the 50 things that were in there. And a lot of people are like, oh, I know none of that stuff. Like, I don't know any of it. So where does somebody even start with kind of coming in and establishing those initial guidelines for their brand?
Well, first you have to establish what's your business. If we're talking about somebody who's not been around for very long, established companies, I would imagine, have done a lot of this work already. But if we're talking about establishing your business, there are some fundamental pieces that need to go into that. There's a book I'll recommend. It's called Traction by Gino Wickman. You've read that book?
We read the same, everything you said I've read. We read the same books.
That's dope, man. Well, that just goes to show our audience here. Like if Ty and I, we have never talked about these books together. If both of us are reading them, just goes to show like these are really good books. They have a lot of wisdom in there. But I think Traction, I've run all of my organizations, even my nonprofits and political campaigns that I've run on Traction, on EOS, which is the entrepreneurial operating system. I think if you haven't got these things figured out, meaning if you haven't figured out your mission, vision, values, your 10-3 1-year vision and goals, what's your marketing strategy in general, who your target market is, if you haven't done any of that work, you're not even at the point of building a brand yet. You're at the point of building a business. And so I would say if you've already got your concept, you already know what solution you're providing, and you've proven that, then you're at the point of where you need to build a business. And I would read that book and copy it. I would just literally do what it says to do. You don't need to like invent a whole lot. It's the genius of that particular book is he's taken years and years and years of other authors. And Ty, I bet you we've read a lot of those other authors too. And he's packaged it into one book. That's the genius of it. You don't have to read as many as we used to have to read. It's just all right in there. And so that's why I say don't even worry about trying to like modify it yet. Modify it once you've gotten some mastery around it. Just knock that off. And then you'll have established the pieces that you need in order to then build a brand. But you can't build a brand if you don't have a business.
Well, how do you figure out, I mean, if your current branding you have is working? How do you know if what you're developed with your brand is actually effective?
Yeah, there's a number of ways of whether or not you can see that. So some tactical ways. Do people search for you? You know, so when I build brands, when our company builds brands, we can see tactically search queries go up for that company. What does that tell us? That tells us that somehow people heard about it and they're hearing more and more about it, and so we're seeing more and more people searching for it. That's a very tactical thing, but you could look in Google Search Console to see if your search queries went up for, if it's your name or your company name or what have you. There are other methods that are focus group like, you know, trying to figure out if people have recall and whatnot. But I find that a good brand does a couple things out of the gates. One is it doesn't waste your money when you have other marketers touching your brand, something I already commented on, right? So that right away is your ROI. The second part of a brand is awareness. Like, does it get beyond the people's hands who are touching this? And awareness matters because that means people now know who you are, what you do, why you're better. And that should help you with a few things. That should help you with traffic, either to your website or just people contacting you. And so you should see an improvement in that. You should see an improvement in your sales cycles. So let's say you have typically a 2 to 3 month sales cycle. If you have a great brand, your sales cycle will be reduced because there's trust inherent in that. as long as you've built a good brand. If you have a bad brand, then it'll take longer. But if you build a good brand, right, your sales cycles should go down. And you might be starting to wonder, like, are we doing something tactically that's different? One of the reasons why sales cycles go down is because people walk in with a pre-established notion of what it's like to work with you. And as a result, they don't have quite the objections mentally that they would if they've never heard of you. They're not cold anymore, they're warm, right? So your sales cycles go down. You'll also see that your just initial contacts, your first meetings will go up. So if you have like an outbound strategy around prospecting, you should see that a good brand will enable you to get more first good meetings. And that's usually a measure that people track when they have outbound prospecting strategies, especially if they have BDRs, business development representatives. If they're using BDRs, they're most often compensated on scheduling or having a good first meeting. That's literally what it's called, a good first meeting. That's how they're comped on top of base. And so if they're getting more good first meetings because you're helping them, like kind of giving them overhead cover with the brand, like you'll see them having more of those. So there's very tactical ways. I don't subscribe to having brand awareness and not having results as in tow with them. I don't personally see the value. If somebody wants to tell me what that looks like, I'm happy to. And plenty of people have tried to tell me. It's not that I've never asked this question. It's that it usually comes down to things I don't value. Here's what I do value. I value results. I value the single goal of my business is to scale profit and purpose. So if it doesn't further either of those goals, if it's not making us more money, reducing our operational expense, increasing our throughput, helping our apprentices graduate from our program to break poverty, if it's not helping us on any of those areas, it doesn't matter to me. That's not to say it doesn't matter to somebody else, but I'm very practical when it comes to this. I'm Indian after all.
What about brand recognition? I mean, then once you establish this, how do you start doing what you said? I mean, and part of this is for them to be able to recognize your brand. So what are the most effective strategies you've seen, Andy, to get out there and actually establish brand recognition?
Yeah, I still think for thought leaders, people who run services businesses, I have not seen anything even put a small flame to content marketing. Content marketing is crushing. And I don't even mean video. I'm actually going to go a little against the grain here. And I think a lot of people have talked about how valuable video is. I'm going to tell you my own experiments are, that's not necessarily true. I think that, and I don't think this, my data shows me that we're outperforming on content on LinkedIn, for example, in getting leads when we write, not on video. It's not to say that people don't consume video. They do. But when you're scrolling, it's way faster to read than it is to watch a video. That's just the truth of it. You can read 2-3x faster than it would take you to watch a video. So while people say that video is working, I've not seen it work for services, and I see LinkedIn as being an incredible opportunity. Now, that's not to say that adding some video here and there might not just be entertaining for your audience to see you in a different manner. Like that's important. Like just the fact that we're video recording this and this may go up on YouTube or wherever it's going to go. That's good. But that's not that's not the only strategy. The real big winner to me is writing, and it's thoughts, and it's unique thoughts. And unique thoughts happen because you've got wisdom, you've got experience, and you have an ability to story tell. So it's not necessarily that everybody can do this either. I don't say like everyone can create content. I know that's a thing out there in this world that other social media folks will say, but I don't believe that. I don't believe everyone's a great storyteller. I don't believe everyone's got the experiences that are worthy of people listening yet. And so if those are your traits, you should play to those advantages. If they're not, you got to find what does play to your advantage. Maybe your exact advantage is complete naivete. I've never done this, and so I need to show you I'm on the work, I'm on the hustle here, but I haven't got this licked. That might need to be the strategy, because you can't come off as a thought leader when you literally don't have the leadership of thought, right? But that's what I see working.
What do you see? Why is the reason that so many companies do rebranding? Like I see it crazy. Like everybody establishes a brand, and then not everybody, but a lot of people establish a brand, and then they go change their logo. They change their company name. They change it completely. So why do companies go through rebranding?
I mean, there's usually a number of reasons. So one of the biggest reasons I see is change in leadership. When you have a change in leadership, one of the most simple, low-hanging fruit ways of making your impact is to change a logo and to change, like a little bit of the wording of what your company is about, the vision, the values, etc. I'll give you an example. When our new governor in the state of Colorado came in, Governor Polis, he's a fellow entrepreneur, believe it or not. He actually was an entrepreneurs organization with me. He founded 1-800-Flowers. He's a big time entrepreneur. Now he's the governor of Colorado. The first thing, literally like the first, gosh, I don't even think he was in office yet. I think he had been elected and not in office. And he announced he was changing the logo. The prior logo was done through a multi-staged effort that basically got designers and crowdsourced the state of Colorado's opinion and allowed people to vote online for which logo they like best. And they chose logo A. It's like this triangle logo. And here comes this new governor. And he's like, yeah, we're changing the logo. And here's what it looks like. Every vehicle, every department, every single person who had that old logo had to redo it. And people were pissed because of how much time and money had already been spent on the other one that just wasn't that old. It was like 2 years old. And I know who was involved with the first logo redesign. And the second one, it came out of one of his offices. It came out of one of the employees who had put it on as an idea for something. He's like, I like that. We're using that. So a lot of times it's a way for leadership to come in and kind of impose their view. We are no longer that, we are this. And that right away sets a tone. It sets a tone that this isn't the old guard anymore. There are other reasons why too. Many times a lot of stakeholders weren't asked as being part of the process. And so while you have a brand, the people that were using it were not involved or asked for their opinions or any feedback or involved at all in the process. And so they often complain about like, this thing's ugly, this doesn't work, like you see like blah, 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 whatever it is. So they often have to go through a process where they truly do involve more voices. And that's one of the things I'm proud of my team for doing is they're really good at involving all the right people and at the same time, not too many people. So, there's a methodology that can be used, who's accountable, who's responsible, they're different, who needs to be consulted and who needs to be informed, right? And so if you made a chart of that, you would be able to say, well, this is the person accountable for this. These people are responsible to make sure that they have input in there. These people we want to consult in this process, and these folks we need to inform. But if you don't go through that process of defining all those 4 different things that I just said, you're going to miss some folks. And that happens all the time. And there's probably even more reasons, just for the sake of for example, when your marketing stops working, ads stop working. A lot of times there's burnout. People have seen it over and over and over again, and like they're no longer responding like they used to. Let's just take a Facebook ad. At some point, some companies burn through their ads, right? And so they keep coming up with new ads, but at some point people are like, yeah, I've seen this, regardless of the ad. And so a refresh of a brand changes everything. It changes the voice, it changes the logo potentially, it changes the look and the feel. And so to consumers, it actually feels like it's a new thing, even though it's not. And I know this. I used to be a DJ for 9 years. The nightclub business, this is what we did. Every 2 to 3 years, we shut it down for a little bit, reopen as a brand new name nightclub, same ownership every time. Because at some point, it wasn't cool and new anymore. And people were like, I've been there. That place is boring. Yeah, but the minute there's a new name and a new night and a new decor, it's like, oh yeah, let's go check out the new spot. It's literally the same owners, right? So there's many reasons, but those are a few I can think of off the top of my head.
So Andy, as we get ready to wrap up, what are the things that I think are important about branding that we really haven't had a chance to dive into that everybody listening, watching, you think really should know?
I think one of the things is, when should you use a personal brand versus a corporate brand? I think that for some product companies, a personal brand is going to be really useful. Let's say one of my friends, she's the founder and CEO of a company called Overtone Hair Color. They invented these fantasy hair colors. And so Megan used to basically be the personal brand that was on Instagram showing these fantasy hair colors that she was doing to her hair, and eventually grew that business to be substantial enough that they could use some of that money and that cash flow to start funding a corporate marketing. So then Overtone became what got funded, but she had to use her personal brand first. Similarly, if you're looking at a services business, let's just take my business, for example. I have a personal brand, so it's good to make investments in me getting out there and getting the name of Flow out there. But at some point, which we've turned the corner on, we started to invest some of that cash flow into building up the brand itself. So I think if you can, you have to look at your business, but if you can put yourself as the brand first, and people can buy you as either the service itself, or they can buy the image of you. Take the hair color company, for example. If you can put it into yourself first, you are going to make better use of every dollar until you're making so many dollars that you have that positive cash flow to go and invest the true amount that it's going to take to grow the company brand. The company brand is going to take multiples more to grow than your personal. And so I would suggest, if you can, look at building your personal first, using that cash, and then building the corporate brand.
Love it. Andy, where can everybody go to learn more?
So go to my company website is feelmeflow.com. And there you can see all the things that we're talking about in terms of services, but also go to the blog. We write prolifically. So every week at a minimum, there's an article that's coming out. Feel free to subscribe as well. And then you can also go to andyseth.com, which is my name, andyseth.com. And there you'll also find that I write, in addition to what's being written at Flow, I write as well. And I write a lot more about what I would consider content for leaders, people that have achieved some level of kind of success and are looking at, what do I do next? That's really my wheelhouse. And so there's a lot of resources in there, but I think there's a lot that anybody at any stage can learn from, because sometimes it's great to see what other people are struggling with, who are kind of at a phase that you're aspiring to be, and to see what those hurdles are that they face, because there might be practical tips in there for you as well. But go to andyseth.com. There you'll see my book, you'll see my album, all kinds of things that we haven't talked about, but there's plenty there.
Cool. Thanks for coming on with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Ty.
So everybody, make sure you check out feelmeflow.com. Great blog, a lot of information about branding there. I can't tell you how important this is. I was just thinking about a quote, but I don't know. I messed it up. But it says, Andy, you might know this. There's a great quote out there that says something about anybody that's spending money on marketing has done a really bad job of branding. Do you know anything? All right.
No, I haven't heard that, but I'll go find out.
I don't know what it is, but it's awesome. Yeah. So anyways, what it comes down to is this. You spend a lot of money on marketing because a lot of people don't recognize your brand, right? And we see some really popular brands out there like Uber that we rarely see an advertisement for whatsoever. That's the importance of branding. And if you think about some of the largest publicly and privately owned companies that are out there, they don't advertise, right? Airbnb, I'm not saying they don't advertise, but I've never seen an ad from Airbnb before ever. So a lot of these companies get to where they are by really mastering their branding. And when you're starting a business and you're $1 million and $5 million or whatever, then what happens is your ability to control your branding really makes it easier for you to grow without the expense of paying for ads and for marketing. That's what I found. So there's so much more to branding that we haven't had a chance to dive into. Make sure you visit feelmeflow.com. That's feelmeflow.com. And visit Andy's personal site too, andyseth.com, and get a ton more information, a lot of good resources there, and get yourself on the right path to getting your branding in line with where it needs to be and getting your branding guidelines set up. So make sure you visit feelmeflow.com and andyseth.com to get your branding mastered so you can come in and accelerate your brand and accelerate your business as well. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Have a great day.